Droughts are one of nature's most subtle, yet destructive forces. Unlike storms or earthquakes, which strike with sudden and obvious force, droughts develop slowly over weeks, months, or even years. They begin with a quiet reduction in rainfall but gradually become catastrophic as the water supply dwindles. Understanding the anatomy of a drought is essential to grasp its true impact and the challenges it presents to ecosystems, agriculture, and human populations. A drought is essentially a prolonged period of insufficient precipitation, but it manifests in different forms depending on the way it affects the environment. The three main types of drought, meteorological, agricultural, and hydrological, each have distinct characteristics, though they often overlap in complex ways. The first stage of drought is meteorological, which occurs when a region experiences a prolonged deficiency in precipitation. This is typically defined by a significant decrease in rainfall compared to what is considered normal for that area. Meteorological droughts vary greatly between different climates. A desert region may have a meteorological drought after a few weeks of no rain, while a rainforest may need several months without rain to enter a drought phase. Meteorological drought is often the earliest warning sign that water shortages are on the horizon, but its exact definition is specific to local climate norms. As a meteorological drought continues, it begins to affect soil moisture and agriculture, leading to what is known as an agricultural drought. Crops begin to wither as the soil dries out and there isn't enough moisture to support plant growth. Livestock struggle as grasslands turn barren, reducing the availability of natural forage. Agricultural drought often leads to food shortages, rising prices, and economic hardships, especially in regions that depend heavily on farming. The impacts can ripple through entire communities, where jobs, incomes, and sustenance are directly tied to the health of the land. One of the most devastating aspects of agricultural drought is its ability to turn once fertile regions into near deserts. Over time, topsoil erodes, and the land loses its ability to retain water. In the worst cases, agricultural land becomes unfit for farming, forcing populations to abandon long-standing farming practices or even migrate to other areas. Hydrological drought, the third and final stage, occurs when water sources such as rivers, lakes, and reservoirs start to dry up. This phase of drought extends beyond immediate weather patterns and is deeply tied to long-term water management practices. When there is not enough water flowing into these systems, the overall availability of fresh water declines. Hydrological drought can devastate water-dependent industries, hydroelectric power generation, and ecosystems that rely on constant water supplies. Communities that depend on these water sources for drinking water, irrigation, and sanitation often experience severe shortages. Hydrological drought is especially harmful to aquatic ecosystems. As lakes shrink and rivers slow, fish and other wildlife struggle to survive, leading to a breakdown in biodiversity. While each type of drought has its own characteristics, they often occur simultaneously, creating a ripple effect. A meteorological drought leads to agricultural drought as crops fail, and this, in turn, creates a hydrological drought as water reserves are depleted. The severity of a drought depends not just on the amount of rainfall but on the region's ability to manage and distribute water effectively. Poor water management can turn a mild drought into a catastrophic one, while well-planned systems can mitigate the worst effects. The slow onset of droughts often makes them difficult to predict and manage. By the time the full extent of a drought becomes clear, it's often too late to prevent major damage. The gradual drying of the land and depletion of water resources can have devastating consequences for ecosystems, economies, and human lives. In the anatomy of a drought, understanding how these elements interact is crucial for preventing and managing their impacts. Whether it's through sustainable farming practices, improved water management systems, or better meteorological predictions, recognizing the signs of drought early can make a huge difference in how communities cope with these slow-moving disasters. Droughts may appear as simple consequences of a lack of rain, but their causes are far more complex. They result from a delicate interplay of natural and human-made factors, which disrupt the balance of water cycles. Understanding the root causes of droughts requires examining global weather patterns, geographic conditions, and human activities that contribute to the onset and severity of these prolonged dry periods. The primary cause of drought is the failure of precipitation over an extended period. However, this failure is often linked to broader climate systems that govern the distribution of rainfall across the planet. Some of the major natural causes of drought include large-scale atmospheric circulation patterns, such as the jet stream, can influence whether a region receives normal levels of rainfall. When the jet stream shifts, it can block weather systems that would typically bring moisture, leaving areas dry for weeks or even months. This can create persistent high-pressure systems that prevent clouds from forming, which leads to prolonged dry spells. One of the most influential climate phenomena affecting droughts is the El Niño Southern Oscillation, ENSO. El Niño occurs when warm ocean waters shift eastward across the Pacific Ocean, disrupting typical weather patterns. During El Niño events, regions that typically receive rain may experience dry conditions, leading to drought. In contrast, La Niña can bring colder, wetter conditions to some areas while intensifying droughts in others. The effects of ENSO vary depending on the location, but the alteration of global weather patterns by these cycles plays a major role in the frequency and severity of droughts. Geography also plays a vital role in the occurrence of droughts. Regions located far from large bodies of water or in areas with prevailing dry winds are more likely to experience drought. Rain shadows, for example, are common causes of drought in regions near mountain ranges. When moist air rises over mountains, it cools and releases its moisture as precipitation on the windward side. By the time the air reaches the leeward side, it has lost much of its moisture, creating arid conditions and, in many cases, persistent drought on the far side of the mountain. The temperature of the ocean can greatly affect the amount of moisture available in the atmosphere. Warmer ocean waters can lead to increased evaporation, creating more rainfall for some regions, while cooler waters reduce evaporation, leading to less atmospheric moisture. Regions adjacent to cool ocean currents, such as the west coasts of continents, often experience persistent dry conditions because the cooler waters inhibit rainfall formation. While natural factors are the primary drivers of drought, human activities can worsen or even trigger drought-like conditions. Industrialization, deforestation, and unsustainable agricultural practices often exacerbate the effects of natural dry spells, leading to more severe and prolonged droughts. Forests play a critical role in the global water cycle by regulating rainfall and maintaining soil moisture. When forests are cut down for agriculture, urban development, or logging, the land's ability to retain water is drastically reduced. Without trees to anchor the soil and help retain moisture, rainwater runs off the land more quickly, leading to faster drying. Over time, deforestation can alter local weather patterns, reducing rainfall and contributing to the onset of drought. Similarly, urbanization transforms landscapes, replacing natural water-absorbing environments with concrete and asphalt. These impermeable surfaces prevent rainwater from being absorbed into the ground, reducing the recharge of groundwater sources and increasing the risk of drought during dry periods. Irrigation is essential for agriculture, especially in arid regions. However, the over-extraction of water for irrigation can deplete local water resources, worsening the effects of drought. In some cases, farmers rely on underground aquifers for irrigation, but excessive pumping lowers water tables, making it harder to access water during dry periods. Over time, this depletion of groundwater sources can lead to long-term water shortages that persist even after rainfall returns. Poor water management is another human factor that exacerbates droughts. Many regions fail to implement efficient water use policies, leading to water wastage during periods of abundance. As a result, when drought strikes, there is less stored water available to meet demand. Building infrastructure, such as reservoirs and dams, can mitigate some drought effects, but without proper management and regulation, these systems can fail to provide enough water during severe droughts. Climate change is arguably the most pressing human-made cause of increasing drought frequency and severity. As global temperatures rise, evaporation rates increase, and many regions experience less reliable rainfall. Warmer temperatures not only reduce the amount of water available in the atmosphere but also dry out soils and vegetation more quickly, leading to faster onset of drought conditions. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has highlighted that many parts of the world will face more frequent and intense droughts as climate change continues to alter global weather patterns. In addition to higher temperatures, climate change can shift precipitation patterns, causing some areas to receive too much rain, while others suffer from extreme drought. These changing patterns can destabilize agriculture, water supplies, and ecosystems, making it harder for communities to adapt. Drought is rarely caused by just one factor. Rather, it is the result of a combination of natural processes and human activities. Natural climate cycles such as ENSO may create the initial dry conditions, but human actions, whether through deforestation, over-irrigation, or climate change, can worsen those conditions, turning a mild dry spell into a catastrophic drought. For instance, the Dust Bowl of the 1930s in the United States was initially triggered by a period of low rainfall, but it was worsened by poor farming practices and overcultivation. Without adequate crop rotation or soil conservation methods, farmers had stripped the land of its natural resilience, leaving it vulnerable to erosion. As the drought continued, winds blew away the topsoil, creating massive dust storms and deepening the crisis. Droughts are among the most destructive natural disasters, affecting nearly every aspect of life. From parched farmlands and dying ecosystems to economic collapse and human suffering, the consequences of drought are profound. While the impacts can vary depending on the duration and severity of the drought, as well as the region's ability to cope, they are universally felt by people, wildlife, and the environment. Agriculture is the sector most immediately and severely affected by drought. As rainfall diminishes and soil dries out, crops begin to fail, leaving farmers struggling to produce enough food. Droughts reduce the availability of water for irrigation, and when there is not enough moisture in the soil, seeds cannot germinate, crops wither, and harvests shrink. The effects on agriculture can be catastrophic, especially in regions that rely heavily on rain-fed farming. In severe drought conditions, staple crops such as wheat, corn, and rice may suffer massive losses. Livestock, too, face severe hardships as grasslands dry up and water sources dwindle. Ranchers are often forced to sell or slaughter their animals due to lack of feed, causing further economic strain. In many cases, the effects of drought ripple far beyond the agricultural sector, driving up food prices, creating food shortages, and increasing the risk of famine in vulnerable regions. Crop failure during droughts can lead to devastating economic consequences. Farmers lose their livelihoods, and rural economies that depend on agriculture suffer as trade dwindles. Smallholder farmers, who typically have fewer resources and rely heavily on their crops for both income and sustenance, are particularly vulnerable. A single season of drought can push these farmers into poverty, with long-term consequences that affect entire communities. In more developed nations, agricultural losses can lead to higher food prices, affecting consumers and markets worldwide. For example, during major droughts in the United States or Australia, global grain prices often rise, impacting food security in other countries. Droughts also take a heavy toll on livestock. As pastures dry up and water sources become scarce, animals struggle to find enough food and water. Ranchers may be forced to cull their herds to avoid further losses, or to pay exorbitant prices for feed, reducing their profit margins. The dairy industry can also suffer during droughts, as reduced feed availability leads to lower milk production. In extreme cases, entire herds may die from lack of water or food, and the losses can take years to recover. The economic ripple effects can devastate rural communities that rely on livestock as a primary source of income, and the human toll in terms of lost livelihoods is immense. Droughts wreak havoc on ecosystems, disrupting the delicate balance that supports plant and animal life. As water sources dry up, habitats shrink, and food becomes scarce, many species struggle to survive. Ecosystems that depend on consistent water flow, such as wetlands, rivers, and forests, are particularly vulnerable. Drought conditions turn forests into tinderboxes, making them highly susceptible to wildfires. As vegetation dries out, even a small spark can ignite massive wildfires that spread rapidly across parched landscapes. In recent years, prolonged droughts have contributed to some of the most destructive wildfires in history, such as those in Australia and California. These fires not only destroy homes and infrastructure but also decimate wildlife populations and reduce biodiversity. Moreover, drought weakens trees, making them more vulnerable to diseases and pests. In some cases, entire forests can be lost due to a combination of drought and pest infestations, such as bark beetle outbreaks, which thrive in dry conditions. These losses disrupt ecosystems that rely on forests for food, shelter, and carbon sequestration. Water bodies like rivers, lakes, and wetlands are essential habitats for countless species of fish, birds, and amphibians. During droughts, these ecosystems face extreme stress as water levels drop. Fish populations may decline as rivers dry up, and wetlands, which are vital breeding grounds for many species, shrink or disappear entirely. The loss of wetlands is particularly devastating, as they act as natural filters for water, support biodiversity, and store carbon. Their disappearance due to drought can lead to a loss of species and an increase in water pollution, further destabilizing ecosystems. Water scarcity is the most direct and dangerous effect of drought. As water sources diminish, communities struggle to meet their basic needs for drinking water, sanitation, and agriculture. Cities and towns reliant on surface water, such as rivers and reservoirs, may find themselves facing severe shortages, while rural areas that depend on wells may see groundwater supplies depleted. During prolonged droughts, governments may be forced to impose water restrictions, limiting how much water households and businesses can use. These restrictions can affect daily life in profound ways, from limiting agricultural irrigation to reducing water for household use. In some regions, people may have to travel long distances to access clean water, or they may resort to using contaminated water sources, increasing the risk of waterborne diseases. In arid regions, droughts can exacerbate existing water conflicts between communities, industries, and nations that share water resources. For example, droughts in the Middle East have heightened tensions over the shared waters of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, as upstream countries reduce the flow of water to downstream neighbors. Many regions rely on underground aquifers for their water supply. During droughts, these aquifers become a critical resource, but over-extraction can lead to long-term problems. Groundwater takes years, sometimes centuries, to replenish, and excessive pumping during droughts can cause permanent depletion. This is especially concerning in areas like the American Midwest and parts of India, where overuse of groundwater during droughts has led to falling water tables and land subsidence. Droughts hit human populations hard, particularly those living in poverty. The economic losses from agricultural failure, rising food prices, and water shortages can drive families into financial ruin. In developing nations, where people rely heavily on farming and have limited access to social safety nets, droughts can trigger widespread suffering. Drought-induced crop failure leads to food shortages, which can quickly escalate into food insecurity. As food becomes scarce, prices rise, and families may struggle to afford basic necessities. In the most extreme cases, prolonged droughts can lead to famine, as has been seen in parts of Africa, where recurrent droughts have left millions on the brink of starvation. When droughts make living conditions unbearable, people are often forced to leave their homes in search of water, food, and better opportunities. This displacement can lead to migration from rural areas to cities, or even across borders. Climate-induced migration due to droughts is becoming an increasing global issue, as people in vulnerable regions, such as the Sahel in Africa or Central America, face persistent droughts that make traditional farming and livelihoods untenable. Droughts can have severe health consequences. Water scarcity can lead to poor sanitation, increasing the risk of diseases like cholera and dysentery. The lack of clean water also makes it difficult to maintain hygiene, which can exacerbate existing health issues. In addition, food shortages caused by drought can lead to malnutrition, particularly in children, increasing the risk of illness and long-term developmental problems. Adapting to drought is essential for the survival of both human societies and natural ecosystems. As droughts become more frequent and severe due to climate change and other factors, communities must develop strategies to manage water resources, sustain agriculture, and protect the environment. One of the most effective ways to adapt to drought is through sustainable water management. This involves using water resources more efficiently, reducing waste, and ensuring that water supplies are preserved for future use. Governments, businesses, and individuals all have a role to play in managing water wisely, especially during times of scarcity. Conserving water is a fundamental part of drought adaptation. Simple measures, such as fixing leaks, using water-saving devices, and limiting non-essential water use, can go a long way toward reducing water consumption. For example, many cities encourage the use of low-flow showerheads, toilets, and faucets to reduce household water use. In agriculture, drip irrigation systems, which deliver water directly to the roots of plants, can significantly reduce water waste compared to traditional methods like flood irrigation. In addition to reducing water use, capturing and storing rainwater can help communities weather droughts. Many regions promote rainwater harvesting systems, which collect and store rainwater from rooftops for later use. This simple technology can provide an important source of water for household needs, especially in areas where municipal water supplies are unreliable. Building dams and reservoirs is another way to ensure water availability during droughts. These structures store excess water during periods of rainfall, which can then be released during dry spells. Reservoirs also help regulate river flows, ensuring a consistent supply of water for agriculture, industry, and households. However, dams can have environmental impacts, such as disrupting fish migration and altering ecosystems. Therefore, careful planning and management are essential to balance the benefits of water storage with the potential harm to natural systems. Groundwater is a critical resource during droughts, but over-extraction can lead to long-term depletion. To address this, some regions are implementing groundwater recharge projects, which involve artificially replenishing aquifers by allowing rainwater or treated wastewater to seep into the ground. This practice helps maintain groundwater levels and ensures that communities have a reliable source of water during drought conditions. Drought poses a significant threat to agriculture, but there are strategies that farmers can adopt to minimize crop losses and maintain food production. These strategies involve changing the way we farm, using more drought-resistant crops, and improving soil management to retain moisture. One of the most effective ways to adapt agriculture to drought is by growing crops that are more resilient to dry conditions. Plant breeders and scientists have developed drought-resistant varieties of staple crops such as maize, rice, and wheat. These crops are genetically adapted to survive with less water, making them better suited to regions prone to drought. Farmers in arid regions, such as sub-Saharan Africa and parts of India, have already started adopting these varieties to safeguard their harvests during dry seasons. In addition to using drought-resistant crops, farmers can diversify their crop selection to reduce the risk of total crop failure. By planting a mix of crops, including legumes, cereals, and root vegetables, farmers increase the likelihood that some of their plants will survive, even in the face of severe drought. Improving soil health is another critical strategy for drought adaptation. Healthy soil has a better ability to retain moisture, which can help crops survive during periods of low rainfall. Farmers can improve soil health by using techniques such as cover cropping, mulching, and crop rotation. Cover crops, like clover or legumes, protect the soil from erosion and add organic matter, which increases the soil's water-holding capacity. Mulching, covering the soil with organic materials like straw, helps retain moisture and reduce evaporation. In addition, efficient water use techniques, such as drip irrigation, are becoming increasingly popular in drought-prone regions. Drip irrigation delivers water directly to the base of the plants, minimizing water loss due to evaporation and ensuring that crops receive the moisture they need. Farmers are also adopting broader strategies known as climate-smart agriculture, CSA, to cope with the changing climate. CSA practices include using weather data to plan planting and harvesting schedules, rotating crops to reduce soil depletion, and implementing agroforestry, integrating trees into farms to provide shade and reduce water evaporation. These techniques not only increase resilience to drought but also help farmers adapt to other climate-related challenges, such as unpredictable rainfall and rising temperatures.